Professor Yannick, we actually could already start the discussion and the debate with all those many terms that you threw out, but I think we can keep that for later. I just would like to remind you of Hayek's speech when he was awarded the Nobel Prize, The Pretense of Knowledge in Society. I think this is also something where we should look back and look from a very humble perspective as individuals where we stand. This is something that we also have forgotten. Professor Perloff, I will introduce you in German, if I may. Frau Professor Perloff ist von der Stanford University eine Literaturwissenschaftlerin, vergleichende Literatur und vor allem für angloamerikanische Literatur. Sie hat ursprünglich begonnen, sich mit den Autoren Lowell, O'Hara und Yates auseinanderzusetzen, bevor sie dann sich weiter entwickelt hat in ihrer Forschungsarbeit. Sie ist natürlich jetzt über vergleichende Literaturwissenschaften und eben vor allem Poetry und aber auch Pädagogik, die sie mit hinein in ihre Arbeiten impliziert. Hat den Robert Penn Warren Prize für Literary Criticism gewonnen und viele andere Preise. Sie publiziert regelmäßig auch an der Washington Post und vielen natürlich regelmäßig in den Fachjournalen. Derzeit ist sie auch an der University of Southern California und without further ado, the floor is yours.
Is it working? Testing, thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, but I feel a little bit, I'm certainly an outsider. I don't know much about economics, but I think Miller Schweitzer invited me because my family knew Hayek quite well. I come from a family of economists, Austrian economists, and so, and Hayek came to our house a few times. So I think I have some points, and I've written quite a bit about Wittgenstein. As Christian Ehrbacher points out in his introduction to Hayek's rediscovered short biography of Wittgenstein, the life trajectories of Wittgenstein and Hayek show remarkable parallels. We've talked about it a little already, both Viennese men served as young soldiers in the Austrian army, both emigrated to England in the 30s and became British citizens after Hitler annexed Austria in 1938. So they're both exile philosophers in a way, and both came to believe. But the one thing they have in common, I think very much, is a belief in the importance of limits, restraints. It's Wittgenstein who said, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. It's important to recognize that I think you find that same philosophy in many ways in Hayek. And the Viennese medical professors called this, I read this in a book recently, a kind of therapeutic skepticism. I think that's a good term, therapeutic skepticism, which they used at the medical school to tell people, and this was in the 1920s, well, we may not be able to cure your cancer, but we can make it better at least. And the main thing is to doubt and not to be so sure of yourself. Anti-ideology, really, in a way. The opposite of the utopian idealism of Weimar Marxism, the drive to change the system. A mistrust of systems, I think, is important. So Hayek and Wittgenstein were related, but distantly. I think I won't talk about that because we have his relative here who will talk about that, and the meeting on the train and these different things. The difference is, of course, generational. There are also big differences. The 10-year difference in age, as well as ethnic, since Wittgenstein, the family is largely Jewish, and Hayek's is not. Wittgenstein was much richer. But the link, I would argue, and this is important for our discussion tonight, is that interwar Vienna was a very particular kind of community. I don't need to tell you all that. And that Austria experienced one of the great moments for art, literature, philosophy, and the social sciences. Now, Erwin Decker, in his recent book, published in Amsterdam, in Cambridge, but he's a professor in Amsterdam, and it's called The Viennese Students of Civilization, makes a good case for the uniqueness of the Viennese outlook and the relation of the various intellectuals to one another. As Hayek himself recalls, I began to go through the list of famous people from Vienna, and I found I knew almost every one of them. And with most of them, I was somehow connected by friendship or family relations, and so on. I think the discussion began, did you know Schrödinger? Oh yes, of course. Schrödinger was the son of a colleague of my father's and came as a young man to our house, and so on. It was like a small village, really, in that everyone knew one another. And that's because the educated population was still very small, and intellectual circles close and coherent. Edward Timms, in his very good biography of Karl Kraus, describes the three interlocking circles, the Miseskreis, the Geistkreis, and the Wienerkreis. And there were other circles too, but those circles are all very interesting and interlocked. The Geistkreis was founded in 1921 by Hayek and Herbert Fürth, who was a very close friend of my family's, and became a prominent economist in the United States. The Mises Circle, around the same time, closely affiliated, produced such major figures as Felix Kaufmann, whom I knew quite well, Gottfried von Haberler, Fritz Machlup, who was at Princeton, then at Harvard, Walter Fröhlich, and my mother used to have little miniature Geistkreises later in Washington, D.C., where those same people came and immediately got into huge arguments about various aspects. Later, the universities like Princeton, where Machlup was, and the Federal Reserve, the National Bureau of Economic Research, where my mother was a member, which had Milton Friedman and Jeffrey Moore. My mother, Ilse Mintz, her specialty was business cycles, came out of the Austrian school, and by extension, out of Hayek. My mother, Ilse Schüller, herself the daughter of a leading Austrian diplomat, Richard Schüller, and he was an economist by training, trained by Karl Menger, so now we go way back to the kind of Menger training, was one of 3 or 4 women allowed to be part of the Mises seminar. The Mises seminar did have women, and I knew all of them. One was Steffi Braun. I think of them as family friends. It's hard to think of them in the seminar. Ellie Offenheimer, Spiro, Marianne Herzfeld, who I think then became a diplomat. So there were noted women, which in the 1920s is certainly unusual, and is still unusual, say, in the United States. The Geistkreis, by contrast, took no women. My father was a member of the Geistkreis. The Geistkreis met once a month at people's homes. It was all male. The wives served refreshments. And many of the people overlapped: Felix Kaufmann, Walter Fröhlich, Alfred Schütz, the philosopher, the phenomenon, who became is very famous in the United States now, philosopher, was a banker. They all had day jobs. You know, most of these people had day jobs. Alfred Schütz was a banker. Friedrich Engel Januszy then came back to Vienna, was a historian. Emanuel Winternitz, the musicologist. So it was a very broad range. Now, what these intellectuals had in common was a sense of restraint as a virtue, as I said, limits. For the economists, and this relates to Wittgenstein, economic knowledge shows us primarily what we cannot achieve, an insight which they hope will have a therapeutic effect on us. This is Decker's words. Restraint both of natural instinct, but also of rationalism. As Hayek himself put it, the economist is the Cassandra of the modern world by occupation. His unfortunate and mostly hopeless task is to shatter illusions. Now, I think that's very interesting because, of course, you could say the same thing about Wittgenstein. The idea is to shatter illusion. It's what you cannot say. That's very important. And people often then say, well, is that all? I mean, what's the system? What are the norms? But that's a terribly important factor. For economists, one does the best one can with the market, but one can't always foresee the obstacles. It's a very different sensibility. I'm looking at it as an outsider now, from the Weimar Republic and the Marxist and utopian theorems of the left. I say this because in the United States, the very word German, when we study German at all, which isn't very much studied in the university, is Weimar. Weimar, Weimar, and Weimar. The Weimar Republic is sort of idolized, which I always find very strange. Not only because, it ended very badly, but also because it's really Austria that had more prominent people in many ways when you think about it. And there were, of course, Austro-Marxists like Otto Bauer, Karl Renner, Max Adler, so forth, but it was a very different kind of situation. Another important point, which makes the Vienna of the period, including the Austrian school, unique, is that they were not prominently academics. That may not seem so strange to you. I don't know how that works here. But in the United States, it's all academicized. It's very much academicized. Everybody's an academic. But because Jews couldn't get jobs at universities, even von Mises couldn't get a job, held various commercial and government positions, but since they couldn't be university professors, they became more and more intellectual. They're all the famous art historians who went to the Warburg Institute, who, when they had already studied all of Western art, then learned about I don't know, Islamic, any other kind of art, because they had a lot of free time. So many of the Geistkreis members had what we now call day jobs, and day jobs have come back again in many ways. Banks, my father was a lawyer, as were many others, but here we must bear in mind that in the interwar period, middle-class men, of course, had no household or childcare responsibilities, worked fairly short hours, so that their evenings were free, and they had a lot of time for writing and conversation. And conversation was very important, much more important than it is, say, in the United States. The idea of a meal or a Hause, whatever, and conversation, dialogue, and community was central. So Wittgenstein himself stood apart from any group. He was not a member of groups, not even the Vienna Circle. He was not a free marketeer. He had some sympathy for a while with socialism, even communism. Remember, he went to Russia in the 1930s hoping to become a worker. If you don't know that story, it's such a wonderful story, where he said, I want to become a worker. I'm so tired of being a philosopher and being at Cambridge. And of course, he went to Russia and the government refused to let him be a worker, but they said he could be a professor, so he left. He was completely disillusioned, and he thought, that isn't at all what I want to do, and went back to Cambridge. At the same time, both Wittgenstein and Hayek were Anglophiles, but they never felt quite at home in Britain. In World War I, Wittgenstein predicted that the British would win because they were, quote, the better race. He said that at one point. But then at the same time, he would say, he was always very conflicted, that he felt German through and through, meaning Austrian. Hayek was a more international figure, felt at home in the UK, later in the US, and also in Vienna. Now, the Hayek memoir, which we've already mentioned, which will be published, as transcribed by Christian Ehrbacher just now in 2018 from the 1953 manuscript draft, is very interesting. It doesn't have so much new information for those of us who know Wittgenstein well, but it's still amazing that this second cousin, or third cousin, wanted to write a biography. After all, Hayek had plenty to do, and when he was at the London School of Economics, he was close friends with Keynes. That's another tie, by the way. Wittgenstein was very friendly with Keynes, although he disagreed with him about most things, and he didn't like the Bloomsburys. You know, Keynes was part of the Bloomsbury Circle, and Wittgenstein did not care for them at all. Hayek felt he was familiar with Wittgenstein's background and could write about it, but he never finished, and it was not published, and the Wittgenstein family evidently didn't want it published at the time. They thought it was a kind of outside view, but it's very well written and interesting, and he interviewed a lot of people and got a lot of information. But I just want to conclude by saying that for our purposes, what is important is less the details than the fact that both men reflect the extraordinary Viennese education of the period, even though Wittgenstein didn't go to the gymnasium, as compared to our economists in the United States, some of whom we always say jokingly are not so well-rounded or well-educated. Hayek was very well-versed in the humanities. He studied psychology. He certainly knew literature very well. He knew the classics, and that makes a huge difference. He was never just an economist. He later wrote all kinds of other things, and he had an interest in Wittgenstein's philosophical principles. Wittgenstein also was never a normal philosopher. He didn't read Hegel, and that wasn't at all the kind of thing that he did. So they have in common that broad background of knowing so much about music, about literature, and yet, you know, they left, but the leaving is not so much a rejection as a feeling of having to look at it perhaps from the outside. And I would say it's very important to remember, and I see this as an outsider, that they're both Austrian, not German. I don't think we stress this nearly enough. It's a very important point to make. Outsiders often equate the two, but the Austrian School of Economics was sui generis, the working out in practical detail of what could make the system better. Hayek begins with questions of price control, monetary control, business practical matters, not elaborate philosophy as, say, like the Frankfurt School of Adorno and Benjamin, praxis rather than theory. So I think that that's a very interesting thing, actually, to have two philosophers, and Hayek is a philosopher too, who are so interested in pragmatic things, the pragmatic side of philosophy, social engineering, government, how things can work. And Henry Hazlitt, the economic writer for Newsweek, opined that it was a strange stroke of irony that the great British liberal tradition of Locke, Milton, Adam Smith, Hume, Macaulay, John Stuart Mill, Lord Acton, should find its ablest contemporary defender not in a native Englishman, but in an Austrian exile, that is Hayek. So I find that there are many ironies here, but it's very interesting and interesting to separate. And I'll just read you, to conclude, a little quote which shows that difference. Theodor Adorno, who in the United States and in England is not so much in the German countries at all, but is treated as Adorno. So my colleagues will say, if they're going to the bathroom, they say, as Adorno says, may I go, or something like that, because he's so famous. But in Adorno's philosophy of new music, where he's talking about Schoenberg's 12-tone system as reproduced in Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus dossier, he says, it's hardly an accident that mathematical techniques in music originated in Vienna, as did logical positivism. The taste for number games is as characteristic of Viennese intelligence as is playing chess in cafes. Silly. The reasons for this are social. While the intellectual forces of production in Austria developed to the advanced state of high capitalist technique, the material forces of production were left behind. Precisely for this reason, however, manipulative calculation became the dream ideal of Viennese intellectuals. A person who wanted to participate in material production was obliged to seek a position in Germany. If he stayed home, he became a doctor or lawyer or devoted himself to number games as a fantasy of financial power. The Viennese intellectual wants to prove this to himself and others. I'd love to know what you think of that, Barbara. But anyway, I'll just end with that because it's such a funny,
I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Professor Perlow, for those insights and for this summary of Hayek and what he stands for. But now I would like to give the microphone and the floor to Dr. Richard Zundrich, who is not only a board member of the Hayek Institute and the Austrian Economics Center, but also a family member of the Hayek family. And born in Vienna, raised in Vienna, classic education and graduation from the University of Vienna with a degree in law, a PhD in law. He then went into banking and is now living in Switzerland as an independent financial advisor, taking care of wealth management and succession planning, venture capital for also other families, and is, of course, one of those people who has a lot to tell you on personal notes. After all, he was sitting on Hayek's lap when he was a boy, but also of what the legacy is that we see, that we face, that we have to defend, that we have to cherish here in Austria, but actually also worldwide. Richard.
Geht's? Ja. Deutsch oder Englisch?
Feel free.
Ich fühle mich sehr geehrt, hier unter all diesen Professoren zu sprechen, weil ich bin kein Akademiker in dem Sinne, dass ich ständig forsche, sondern eigentlich mehr ein Praktiker. Ich habe zwar ein Doktorat in Jus von der Universität Wien, einer der letzten, der das in der alten Studienordnung gemacht hat, worum mich alle beneiden, nämlich, dass ich keine Arbeit schreiben musste. Das ist allerdings das gleiche Doktorat, das Hayek auch gemacht hatte. Noch an der sogenannten neuen Universität, wo meine amerikanischen Freunde immer darüber lachen, dass unsere neue Universität inzwischen 150 Jahre alt ist. Und hatte meine Prüfung in Volkswirtschaft bei einem gewissen Herrn van der Bellen. Der hat damals ein Freithema gegeben und man konnte das Freithema behandeln und dann hat er einen geprüft. Und ich war ein recht fauler Student und bei uns zu Hause hatten wir diese ganzen Hayek-Werke herumstehen und ich habe geschaut und das Dünnste, was im Regal stand, war die Entnationalisierung des Geldes. Das hat knappe 60 Seiten, habe ich gedacht, das bringe ich schon hin. Habe das einmal durchgelesen, war relativ kürzlich erschienen, bin zum Van der Bellen marschiert, habe das gemacht. Dann hat er mich Keynes rauf und runter geprüft, wovon ich keine Ahnung hatte, bis er dann sagte, was machen Sie gegen die Arbeitslosigkeit? Da habe ich gesagt, die Löhne senken. Damit war die Prüfung dann vorbei. Dann hat er mich beiseite genommen, hat gesagt, ich muss Ihnen ein Gut geben aufgrund Ihres ausgezeichneten Freithemas. Aber tun Sie mir angefallen, gehen Sie nicht in die Wirtschaftspolitik. Warum ich das erzähle, ist, dass eben damals die Universität Wien noch, selbst zu meiner Zeit, ging es noch kreuz und quer zu. Man hat zwar Jus inskribiert, aber man hat hören können, was man wollen hat. Und das schreibt Hayek auch in seinem biografischen Fragment, das war das, was ihn sehr interessiert hat. Er ist irgendwo hingegangen, hat bei irgendwem eine Vorlesung gehört und hat darüber diskutiert. Das war Familientradition. Die Hayeks oder von Hayeks waren die niedrigste Form des Adels, haben es wegen Verdiensten gekriegt im Jahr 1781 von Joseph II. Ein gewisser Herr Hayek hat bei einem böhmischen Grafen die Gutsverwaltung inne gehabt und hat bei Schwechat und irgendwo in Böhmen eine Kartonfabrik aufgebaut. Und im Adelsdiplom steht, die Hayeks wurden geadelt, weil durch den Aufbau dieser Kartonfabrik wurde die Bevölkerung erhöht, die Wirtschaft gemehrt, womit man mehr Steuern erheben konnte und auch mehr Rekruten für die Armee einziehen. Das war der Grund, warum der von Hayek damals das gekriegt hat, was ich recht witzig finde, weil später mal hat Hayek für ähnliche Ideen doch den Nobelpreis gekriegt. Weil die Wirtschaft ist gut fürs Land. Ich beschäftige mich ein bisschen mit der Familiengeschichte. Die wurden also in Wellen, dieser erste von Hayek wurde mit 10% an diesen Fabriken beteiligt und wurde recht wohlhabend. Die zogen dann nach Wien, hatten dann genug Geld, um ihre Kinder ins Theresianum zu schicken. Dann irgendwann einmal Mitte des 19. Jahrhunderts war einer dieser Herren im Theresianum und dann schickte der Kaiser ein Schiff um die Welt. Forschung war damals sehr in und dieser junge Mann hat offensichtlich mit 17 das Theresianum ohne Matura verlassen, damit er auf dieses Schiff mitfahren konnte. Die Hayek'sche Seite der Familie waren alles Biologen, Ärzte, Chemiker, an der Forschung interessiert. Wir haben noch Erstausgaben in Deutsch von Darwin und Ähnlichen. Und ich habe zu Hause in meinem Bücherregal jede Menge Bücher, die meine Vorfahren geschrieben haben. Also eine sehr wissenschaftliche Familie, aber eben immer auch im Staatsdienst für irgendwelche Adeligen tätig in so einer Position. Und auch in meiner Familie, ich spreche zwar immer für einen kleineren Staat und gegen die Regierung, aber mein Vater war über 40 Jahre im österreichischen diplomatischen Dienst und hat da sehr viel Propaganda für den österreichischen Staat gemacht, wobei ich das auch in den 70er Jahren hautnah kennengelernt habe, weil die Deutschen hatten natürlich das 7-fache Budget mit ihren Goethe-Instituten und sonst was. Und plötzlich war ich in der Schule in Washington und mein Vater Leiter des Informationsdienstes in New York und dann hat ein gewisser Hayek den Nobelpreis gekriegt und dann war natürlich die Hölle los. Aber in Österreich haben die Leute alle von Hayek nichts gehört gehabt. Aber in Amerika war er plötzlich der Superstar. Wie gesagt, mein Großvater war Hayeks Bruder, war Leiter der Anatomie in Wien. Und als ordentlicher Universitätsprofessor hat man noch eine schöne Wohnung gekriegt, oben auf der Anatomie. Und das ganze Klump, was in den ganzen Familien übrig geblieben ist, ist irgendwie bei den ganzen Erbschaften dorthin gewandert. Und als ordentlicher, nicht sozialversicherungsschädigender ist mein Großvater 2 Tage vor der Pensionierung mit 70 als emeritierter Professor gestorben. Und dann wanderte dieses ganze Zeug in die Wohnung meiner Großmutter in irgendeinen Keller im 19. Bezirk. Und ich habe dann die Papiere ererbt als Ältester meiner Generation und mit einem bisschen geschichtlichen Interesse. Und wie gesagt, alle anderen waren Ärzte oder Biologen oder sonst was. Und nur Hayek und ich frönen den dunklen Künsten. Und dann fand ich einen Brief ans Christkind der 3 Brüder, wo sie sich einen Satz Zinnsoldaten, einen Matadorkasten und Bücher über Biologie, ich nehme an, da hatten die Eltern ein bisschen eingegeben, was sie sich zu wünschen hätten. Der Brief ist datiert 1906 von den 3 Brüdern. Und dann habe ich gefunden, sollte man sich diese ganzen Papierlen, die ich da geerbt habe, ein bisschen näher anschauen und fand dann Hayeks Briefe von der Italienfreund 1917-18 an seine Mutter und die Briefe, die er als Doktoratsstudent 1922-23 in New York als erster österreichischer Ökonom, der dann nach dem Krieg gekommen war, nach Hause geschrieben hatte. Und werde diese beitragen an die demnächst hoffentlich erscheinende Hayek-Biografie. Die haben natürlich alle nichts mit seinen späteren ökonomischen Wirken, sondern es ist ein Schildern der Zustände seiner Zeit. Ich habe dann auch in diesem ganzen Konvolut 3 Tagebücher von Hayeks Großmutter und auch die Tagebücher seiner Mutter. Die Hayeks waren, wie gesagt, man hat halt gesagt Beamtenadel, mal ein bisschen mehr Geld, mal ein bisschen weniger Geld. Aber die Jurascheks, seine Mutter, also mütterlicherseits, der Sektionschef Jurascheks, das waren die Zeit, wo ein Sektionschef noch was war, da gab es in der ganzen Monarchie nämlich nur 8 Stück. Heute gibt es ein paar mehr, nur in Österreich. Und die hatten die Wohnung im heutigen Bristol, da hat man noch bis zum Semmering gesehen, in der Belle Etage vom heutigen Bristol. Und die Jurascheks haben damals die berühmten Soirees gegeben, wo eben auch Schrödingers und Konsorten kamen. Und damit will ich eigentlich schließen, das ist das, was an dieser Zeit so interessant war. Man hat diskutiert und man hat kontroversiell diskutiert. A, fächerübergreifend. Da waren Philosophen und Physiker und Juristen und Biologen. Man muss denken, 1918 gab es in Ungarn schon den Kommunismus, in anderen Ländern nicht. Die haben gegeneinander gesprochen. Meistens hat irgendwer eine viertelstündige Rede gehalten und darüber wurde dann diskutiert. Diese Diskussionskultur geht mir im heutigen Österreich ab. Weil was wir machen bei allen unseren Veranstaltungen, wir machen die Free Market Roadshow in 45 Ländern, wir bemühen uns so viel wie möglich, junge Leute zu überzeugen. Aber wenn man in Österreich eine Veranstaltung macht, es kann sein, dass das Hayek Institut und die Grünen und die Roten und was weiß ich was am gleichen Abend zum gleichen Thema reden und man kriegt das Publikum des anderen nicht zu einer Diskussionsrunde. Österreich ist das einzige Land mit einem roten und einem schwarzen Automobilclub. Ich habe gelesen, jetzt anlässlich 60 Jahre Austrian Airlines, dass bei der Gründung der Auer die Idee war, dass die Roten und Schwarzen jeweils eine eigene Fluglinie haben. Ich meine, wo gibt es denn sowas? Können wir nicht auch über interessante Themen kontroversiell diskutieren? Ich werde immer wieder gefragt, was würde Hayek dazu sagen, nachdem ich die Entnationalisierung des Geldes jetzt meine ganze Karriere mitverfolgt, habe ich jetzt ein Interview gegeben, wurde gefragt, was würde Hayek zu Bitcoin sagen. Alle diese Sachen, die diese Herren in den 20er, 30er und 40er Jahren diskutiert haben, sind heute wieder hochaktuell. Und warum sie in Österreich nicht diskutiert wurden, frage ich mich. Vielen Dank.